So today we're saying goodbye to my Santa Cruz 5010. This is the 5th generation of the 5010, and it's the first to sport the mixed wheel platform. If you want to see more details about that, the history, that's in my first video and my initial review of the 5010. I've been constantly surprised about this bike's capabilities, and I'll be sad to see it go. But what should I replace it with? Drop a comment to let me know what you think. Before we get into it, please subscribe. I picked this up from Jensen USA, and the 23 and 24 models, there's some great deals. So if you want to check one of those out, I'll put some links in the description. I've had this bike for nearly a year now, and I've swapped the wheels, a bunch of tires, and the fork to squeeze as much performance out of it as I thought I could. Let's start with my final build and what I believe to be the best version of this bike. As you may have seen in my Olin's video, I landed on the RXF 36 M.2. So this bike has the same travel as before, 140, but just a stiffer, more supportive fork. Gold Chris King headset I think looks good with the gold on the Olin's, but was actually the only color in stock when I built this bike. Shimano XT stoppers keep me from overdoing it. And while I have a 203 rotor front and back, I could probably get away with a 180 out back. E13 bar with 35 millimeters of rise and a 40 millimeter anvil stem. That gives an extra 5 millimeters of rise, which I really like for this area. Lock-ons are also a must in the Pacific Northwest, and I really like these Evil grips to round out the cockpit. With just a hint of mud, this red really pops. Next I have the 1UP 210 dropper with a carbon railed bond trigger saddle. We've got the rest of the Shimano XTR drivetrain, but just XT cranks, as the carbon cranks that came with the build kit had some issues. I would love some XTR cranks, but boy are those spendy. Galfer rotors seem fine, but do actually whistle at high speeds. Rounding this out, we have the Raceface Turbine R wheels with the Maxxis Assegai Max Grip EXO Plus up front and a Minion DHR2 Max Terra EXO Plus out back. I will say that after a bunch of options on the back, I would actually go double down for the casing. The EXO Plus squirms on hard landings, jumps, and corners, even at 35-ish PSI. Well, that's it, and built up, you're looking at 31 pounds, 2 ounces. I did get it down to just under 30 pounds with the Fox 34, but the Olin's 36 is definitely worth the weight penalty. So let's talk about the fun stuff. This is where the bike really shines, and what most of us care about anyway. A bike like this should climb well, but if that's all mountain biking was about, I probably wouldn't mountain bike. Woo! We've had our ups and downs, but the addition of the Olin's 36 was a highlight. This may be why Santa Cruz specs the bike with a 35mm stanchion RockShox pike, but I'm not convinced that that's enough fork. When set up with the Olin's 36, this is my ultimate big ride high alpine bike. It's still only 130 and 140 millimeters of travel, but it's now better balanced, and that predictability I talked about earlier with the frame can now be said about the whole bike. Starting on jumps, even with a large front wheel, the 5010 feels like a dirt jumper. That was about the only time I used the lockout. It took a second to get used to the big wheel on steep lips, but overall, the bike just loves to get off the ground. This nicely segues us into corners and chunk. Just like a jump, the 5010 loves to be pushed into a corner and pops out with even more speed. This is an area where the mixed wheel bikes, and specifically the Santa Cruz suspension, excel. On the less fantastic side is the chunk. The robust frame and surprisingly stiff back end of the 5010 provide a predictable response, even if you know that response is you getting bumped. When it comes to the chunk, you find yourself looking for smoother lines, gaps, and a safe way out. But I think that's where the 5010 can really help you grow as a rider. Last in the steeps. You see a 65-degree head angle and think steep. All right, well, I'm here, so. But really, that was just a standard on enduro bikes not that long ago. 5010 rides the chief. It's crazy how good this bike is. And with the body position of the mixed wheels, I've taken this thing down nearly everything I've taken my Nomad down. I'm just more engaged and keeping an eye on that run out. Woo! Because of the steepness around my area, I never thought this bike would see as much riding as it has. Better still. First time I took this bike around this little switchback, I ended up pretty far down the hill. And I wouldn't say that was the bike's fault. It definitely was probably more overconfidence. Since that ride, I've been able to whip out around that without much effort. And so I stand by that this is a great bike for switchbacks. Even when it's this easy, you can't totally check out. Now, how does it climb? This is going to be a short section. The 50-10 has a very supportive suspension, and when you stand on the pedals, it goes. It's not to the point of sacrificing traction or comfort, so on long climbs and big days, this has been my bike of choice. It's sprightly and just fun to go uphill on. Coming from Colorado, I rode a lot of enduro bikes on high alpine rides, mainly because you never knew what you were totally going to get into. There was a bunch of scree, a lot of big rocks, and a lot of hiking trail that wasn't necessarily ideal for biking. And I gotta say, now that I've had this bike, I would put this bike up against a lot of those older enduro bikes. It's still light by today's standards, and when I put this bike up against my Nomad or my DaVinci chainsaw on the climbs, it just feels like cheating. So how's this bike held up? Well, while value hasn't always been Santa Cruz's forte necessarily, the quality of the bike has been. And that's no different on this bike. The paint has held up so well, which is crazy because when you're riding around here a lot, it's like you're wet sanding the bike constantly. The paint is still very glossy and the pivots are solid and don't need any new grease or replacement. Pivots are still solid after a year, and while there is a little creaking coming from the glove box cover, you only notice it when taking the water bottle in and out. One note on reliability and maintenance. With my experience of the current 50-10 and Nomad, as well as older Santa Cruz bikes, both here and formerly in Colorado, after a bit there can be some headset creaking, and I found that to be twofold. First, on complete bikes, Santa Cruz ships with these lightweight keyed headset spacers, so if you don't line them up on installation, they'll roll over, crushing each other, and you'll end up with a creak and even loose headset. Second, every Cane Creek headset I've run on these requires frequent disassembly, cleaning, and greasing, especially in those dry, dusty desert climates of Colorado and Utah. I finally bit the bullet on this one and went with the Chris King, and I've been pleasantly surprised. So while you may not think of the Santa Cruz as a value option, with a lifetime warranty on the frame and pivots, I would say if you keep the bike for longer, it really is. And that'll be reflected in the Loam score. So how does the 50-10 look in the Loam library? The Loam score is 44 out of 50, which puts it here against similar short travel bikes. It and the Evil following had a lot of back and forth, but its fit and finish just barely edged it out. So what are my final thoughts, and who is this bike for? Well, my idea of the ideal 50-10 rider has evolved a bit since my initial review. Your lycra-clad speedsters are still going to love it, but maybe they'll try something harder than a dirt road. Upper level riders are also going to love the jibby nature, but also that it's ready for some free ride. Finally, your beginner to mid-level riders are much better served than the old bike. It's not going to hang you out to dry as much, and as you progress, you're not going to feel nearly as undergunned as the travel numbers would suggest. Just don't take it to Whistler or Keystone. This latest version of the 50-10 is the most capable yet and can still beat your buddies up the hill. There isn't a sacrifice for capability like so many other bikes out there. Thanks for watching, and I'm going to need to replace this with a 120 to 130 bike, so let me know. I'm kind of leaning towards the Ibis Ripley or the Norco Optic. What do you think, and is there any other options I should consider? If you need anything for yourself or your ride, check out the links in the description and on my page. It's no cost to you and supports the channel. Now get out, go fast, and take chances. See you next week. First time ever on this trail, first time ever down that. I don't even know what this trail's called. Nice. That was good after my last little mistake on the Nomad.